Hello and welcome to Press TV's debate. I'm Marzieh Hashemi. Thanks so much for being with us. Human Rights Watch has accused United Arab Emirates of having secret prisons in southern Yemen. According to HRW, the Emiratis have made many people disappear in Yemen, including children. Now, the Houthis, who are fighting against the bombing campaign being waged on them by Saudi Arabia, are the ones who are being detained the most. What right does a foreign country have in detaining Yemenis and even torturing them in their own country? Stay with us as we take a look at this topic on this debate.
As Yemenis are struggling with a war imposed by Saudi Arabia and its allies, a shocking report has revealed that people in the south of the country are suffering from yet another trauma. According to separate reports released by Human Rights Watch on the Associated Press, the United Arab Emirates and its allies maintain a secret network of prisons in Yemen, where thousands of people, including children, are detained. According to the reports, the prisoners are routinely abused and tortured there. This man has been kept in a UAE-run prison in Mukalla for nearly 6 months. He was blindfolded and his hands were tied all the time.
I stayed there for around 177 days without proper investigation. They questioned me after 10 days of detention and that was it. But during those 177 days, there were beatings, insults, humiliation, and as for practicing torture, there's a man they called a doctor, an Emirati, who's a specialist in torture alone.
His only charge is that one of his distant relatives was connected to the Al-Qaeda group. Other former detainees say beating, flogging, sexual assault and extreme torture, such as grilling, have been common practices in the UAE-run prisons. Those who've managed to get away are too afraid to testify.
Unfortunately, there are cases of torture that have come out, but they are anonymous testimonies over fears for the lives of the people who have gotten out.
Lawyers and families say almost 2,000 men have disappeared inside the clandestine prisons. Ali Awad Abdu Habib was kept in Aden's Mansoura prison, along with his father and 7 other of his family members. He says he was never charged.
They were interrogating me and they told me they didn't know for what. I asked them, what are the charges? And they said they didn't know. I never got charged.
The complex where they were kept was raided and damaged. Habib's father is missing and they believe he was transferred to a UAE military base in Eritrea. The Human Rights Watch confirmed Habib's claim, saying the UAE is reported to move some of the detainees to locations outside the country, including its base in Eritrea. The UAE government has rejected all the allegations, saying there are no secret detention centers and no torture of prisoners. But Pentagon officials have a different story, acknowledging the existence of such prisons. They've also confirmed the involvement of U.S. forces in interrogations of detainees. The UAE is part of Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen that began in 2015. The United States and Britain provide military support to the coalition. Shockingly, the international community has turned a blind eye to Saudi atrocities in Yemen. The war has so far claimed the lives of over 12,000 people, and the new report adds troubling details to Saudi war on Yemen, indicating that there seems to be no end in sight for civilian suffering in the impoverished country.
I'd like to welcome my guest to the program. Out of London, Director Shafaqna Institute for Middle Eastern Studies, Ms. Catherine Shakda, and political commentator and Middle East expert, Mr. Jihad Morakadeh, out of Beirut. Thank you both for being with us. So let's start this off in Beirut. Ms. Morakadeh, what do you think, or what do you make of this Human Rights Watch report on these Emirati-built secret prisons in Yemen?
Well, first of all, I must say that I have a lot of respect for Human Rights Watch, but people have to put things in perspective. At the end of the day, you are living in the Middle East, and from Libya to Egypt to Syria, Iraq, and everywhere else, you have these kind of practices that have been going on since the days of Nasser in Egypt. So there is nothing new in all of that. On top of this, when you are in a situation of war, these things have a better opportunity to manifest themselves than in times of peace. The problem is that even in times of peace, security organizations all over these countries practice very similar torture.
Are you saying that then torture is okay, depending on the situation?
No, not at all. I'm saying this is what happens in the area. I'm not approving, but I'm saying this is the Middle East. It's been going on for 50 more or 70 years. And this is not Europe, this is not the United States. And actually, you must remember that when the United States wanted to interrogate people, they would use Gaddafi prisons, Syrian prisons, Egyptian prisons, because these people knew or could interrogate in a way that the United States could not.
Okay, what about that, Catherine Shakdam? Your take on that? That's just the way things are done in the region.
Well, I'm actually appalled at such a comment. I mean, what is that supposed to mean? It's just the way of the Middle East. I mean, if anything, it's very it's very ethnocentric, borderline xenophobic to just assume that because it is the Middle East, then torture is okay and is to be expected. And we have to remember here that, those acts of torture are actually being committed, on the demand of Washington, courtesy of the UAE, because the last time I checked, and by admission of Washington officials, it was the USA who actually asked for the UAE to act on its behalf in Yemen. And if there is one point I would like to make, though, and that we fail to see in mainstream media, is that those prisons, for example, the one in Mukalla, is actually being located in an area which is supposed to be under Al-Qaeda control. So I found very interesting how a UAE-run prison, which is financed and run from behind by Washington, is actually located exactly right bang in the middle of Al-Qaeda territory. And we have to understand too that the UAE is acting, some kind of occupying force in Yemen, in the south of Yemen, exactly again where Al-Qaeda and other Wahhabi and Salafi and Deobandi forces are actually operating. So again, it's very convenient for the UAE and Washington and Saudi Arabia to actually be positioned exactly where terrorists are actually operating, and carrying out those horrendous, horrible crimes. And we are supposed to be okay with it because this is the Middle East. This is the way that things are done in the Middle East, really?
What about that, Mr. Marikande, that these entities are actually located, as Ms. Shakdam has just said, in areas that are also controlled by Al-Qaeda? Do you find that odd?
I find the comment very odd because I don't believe it at all. First of all, because it is obvious for everybody that the United States have been fighting Al-Qaeda in Yemen for 18 years. So to say that the UAE has a prison financed and run by Washington in the middle of Al-Qaeda area, it's totally outlandish. Now, coming back to the issue of the Middle East, you have to be realistic. This is not Europe. This is not the US, okay? And you cannot possibly, and you can extend actually the reasoning I made to many other countries in the area that I did not name. So when you are in a situation of war, as you are in Yemen, this is all the more possible. Accepting it, I don't accept torture anywhere in the world. However, this is life. Go see the prisons of Bashar al-Assad, what happens to them. Go see the prisons of Saddam Hussein in the old days. Go see the prisons of Gaddafi. Gaddafi would make people disappear just like that. Go see the prisoners in Iraq. So no, I mean, yes, we would love to live in an ideal world, but objectively, this is the situation.
Well, Catherine, why in general would the UAE be involved in setting up these secret prisons? You talked about perhaps of the orders of the United States, and if so, what is the goal? What do they hope to accomplish by doing this?
Well, first of all, when the UAE gets involved, the only reason why the UAE gets involved in Yemen, by the way, following the call of Saudi Arabia, was that they wanted to be able to control, the south of Yemen, and in particular the seaport of Aden, because of course the seaport of Aden is, geopolitically very, important and could actually potentially challenge, Dubai in terms of its capacity, seaport capacity. So Dubai wanted to make sure that it could put a lead on this, and so it got involved. Now you have to remember as well that for the past about 5 years to 7 years, the UAE has seen a lot of movement in terms of intelligence on the part of several Western capitals, mainly Washington, that have moved their headquarters over there to be able to control and gather intelligence from the UAE, because the UAE has proven very welcoming to the intelligence community, and so it would make sense for the UAE to actually act on behalf of Washington in Yemen, because there's an entire media blackout. No one really knows what is happening, and of course the main people, or I would say segment of the population that is being targeted, once again are religious minorities, including Shia Muslim in Yemen. And the one thing I would like to highlight too is that about a year ago, Shafaqna actually made a report about what was happening in Yemen, where we had Al-Qaeda type militants running around with UAE uniforms targeting religious minorities in Yemen. And if you recall, there was an incident with nuns being burned alive, and priests being beaten up and actually murdered, and no one really picked up on it because it was conducted under the cover of UAE occupation / Saudi occupation, and so it had to be dismissed. But we have to understand that what is happening today in the south of Yemen under the cover of the UAE is no different than what you see happening in Syria by the hands of Daesh, or in Iraq by the hands of Daesh again. The agenda and the technique used are very similar.
What about that, Mr. Markadeh? It appears that there is that media blackout in Yemen, because we haven't heard a lot about, let's say, for example, talking about these Emirati prisons, though we have various reports from various entities, not just Human Rights Watch, that they exist, but we have many actually witnesses who were involved or imprisoned who are now free, that testified to what they had endured.
Can I turn the question around? What about the media blackout on the Houthi prisons? This we didn't hear about. Why? There are plenty of torture being done by Houthis in Yemen to Yemenis, not UAE to Yemenis, UAE soldiers to Yemenis, Yemeni Houthis to Yemenis. With regard to the, so if you come back to the news blackout, obviously there is news blackout all over, because when you are conducting a war, you are conducting a war. You are not opening yourself up for criticism, neither from one side nor the other. Obviously,
so when war is conducted, so it doesn't get media attention. That's very interesting, because if we look at the United States invasion of Iraq, and it was live and in living color, and complete direct broadcasting at the time that it was happening. So now all of a sudden, because of war, things are not shown. Yemen is not talked about at all. Catherine Shakram, your take on this, Mr. Morakadeh's perspective, his comments.
Well, again, I think, first of all, he's not really answering your question, is he? And what he's doing is deflecting away, trying to basically excuse the UAE and the fact that they're committing horrible war crimes. One could argue crimes against humanity, because they are targeting children, and to try to accuse the resistance movement of doing the same.
But
when I'm asking, where are the proofs? Because when it comes to human rights, well, I'm speaking, sir. When we talk, Human Rights Watch actually came out, and I believe it to be, a genuine international organization. They have gathered, valid evidence. They have testimony, and therefore what they say is true. So where are your evidence in terms of the resistance movement torturing anybody, anywhere in Yemen? And we have to remember that, as you mentioned, yes, the resistance movement is fighting a foreign occupation. So yes, I would expect them to not exactly sending, flowers to Saudi Arabia, because they're being carpet bombed, sir. So yes, they have a right, to behave in the manner that they see fit. And if you don't like it, I would go back to your argument and say it's war, sir.
Jihad Morakadeh, what about that? Do you think that in general, I mean, we're talking about the UAE, but it's not just the UAE. We know that the Saudis are actually the ones directly involved in bombing regularly the Yemenis. And in the middle of this vicious campaign, so many civilians have been killed. Do you think these countries thought that they would be this bogged down in Yemen for this long?
Well, first of all, I would like to correct many misgivings about the war in Yemen. This is not a war of Saudi Arabia and UAE against Yemen. It's a war by the legitimate government of Yemen against people who try to overthrow it. This, according to the international community. So you cannot take the international community when it suits you and forget about it when it does not suit you. So don't call it resistance. It's not a resistance. The resistance is that of Abdul Mansour Hadi in Aden. Second, they have made significant progress because when the war started, the Houthis were in Aden and in the south of Yemen. They are not there anymore, and they are just about to lose ties. Third, with regards to torture, generally speaking, and how come HRW did not inquire about the Houthis' torture? Well, I would remind you of the United Nations report, which which very precisely mentioned Houthi torture. However,
of course, and we know how reliable they are.
It's reliable when it suits you. It's not reliable when it does not. So basically,
it's funny coming from you.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. So basically, the day the Houthis open their prison doors to HRW, then we will talk about it. Meanwhile, I consider this as one-sided argument.
Well, Mr. Morkani, let me just jump in here. You're talking about the Saudis, who we've just seen that they have signed an unbelievable military deal with the United States. So we know very well equipped with the latest equipment. And you're going to compare, these are people on the ground, these are Yemeni civilians that they are bombing. They have bombed the infrastructure. They have bombed civilian areas, sir. We're not talking about bombing, let's say, military installations. We're talking about over 12,000 people that have been killed.
I'm sorry. I fully disagree with you. First of all,
you disagree that more than 12,000 people have been killed? Do you disagree that there is a siege on the area? Do you disagree that the majority of Yemenis are starving and that cholera is big in the country, sir? Do you disagree with those facts?
Yes, I do, because the majority of Yemenis are against the Houthis. They are with the legitimate government of Yemen, and the legitimate government of Yemen has called upon Saudi Arabia to help it recuperate Yemen. So the culprits and the revolutionists in Yemen are the Houthis. One point, final. This is international community. So when these people stop the fighting, they are responsible for the cholera, they are responsible for the killing, and then are you trying to tell me seriously that the Houthis are not doing anything? They're not destroying bridges, they're not destroying roads, they're not destroying people, they're not destroying villages. They are not preventing.
I'm sure everything is relative, sir, especially when you have bombs raining down on your head. I do not think you compare it. But Ms. Shakhdam, your take on what our guest in Beirut is saying.
I just have one word to say. I think it's despicable to have someone that is being sold, to the Saudi narrative to the point that he's actually willing to blame, the death of civilians on those very civilians. I don't think that he actually has much respect for human life. And I recall actually during a debate that he actually stood in his chair and told me, I'm sorry I'm speaking, sir, and you actually said to me that you did not believe that Houthi blood was actually worthy. I recall this comment very well, so I'm not surprised that you look at Yemeni civilians and think they are cheap blood, sir, but you have to remember that these people, whether you like it or not, and regardless of what the international community say, have a right to their political future. They have a right to live happily and free of oppression. And I'm sorry to say, sir, but until Saudi Arabia and Al Saud stop carpet bombing Yemen, there will be a resistance movement in Yemen because the people are entitled to their resistance. It's a natural right.
One question.
Go ahead.
How about the other Yemenis? Those who are fighting against the Houthis, they have no rights? How about the legitimate government of Yemen?
I'm saying, sir,
they have no rights?
Those people have sold out to the Saudi agenda. So yes, sir, they are traitor to their nation. And yes, sir, they have forfeited their right to resistance.
Mr. Morkani, let me just get in here, both of you, because we're almost out of time. I want to cover a couple of other things. Mr. Morkani, like former prisoners now say that they were tortured in these prisons and that there were Americans overlooking or standing nearby. Your take on this, if this is true, what exactly does it mean?
Well, it all depends on who are the prisoners. There may be Al-Qaeda prisoners and the Americans overlooking, or there may be other type of prisoners that the Americans are overlooking just to make sure that no excesses are committed.
So the Americans are involved. If the Americans are involved in Yemen, when they're involved, they're just there to make sure that no excesses are committed. Is that true, sir?
I'm just answering your question. I have no specific idea on the question.
And I'm asking for the explanation of what you've just said, sir. I know you're answering it, and I'm just asking for clarity on what you've just said.
I have no information whatsoever about the presence of Americans, if this is what you're asking.
Okay, Catherine Shakna, your take on this, that many of the former prisoners have said that there were Americans standing nearby. Your take, what really is Washington's perspective on terrorism, and especially when we look at the situation taking place in Yemen?
Well, the first thing is that, it's not a myth. Washington officials actually admitted to that reality, that they are in fact overlooking. They are saying that they're not involved directly into the torturing, but you have to remember that, torturing is illegal under international law. So regardless of what your other guest is saying, it's wrong, in any way, shape or form, regardless of the geography or the circumstances. So that's number one. Number two, it only means that, once again, Washington is involved in torturing, illegally torturing, civilians in a foreign country where they have absolutely no business being involved in. They are meddling within the affairs of a sovereign nation. And what they're doing actually is not even holding Al-Qaeda militants. What they're actually doing is, holding a prison in an area which is controlled by Al-Qaeda. And what they're doing is actually trying to target, religious minorities and targeting resistance fighters. So once again, you have to ask yourself, does Washington actually really stand for human rights, really stands for democracy, if in fact they're doing everything that they possibly can with the help of the UAE, with the help of the Saudi, to actually forfeit, destroy, completely disappear a movement which is completely democratic and actually stand for pluralism.
I'm so sorry, Ms. Shakna, to interrupt you. So sorry. I'm so sorry,
movement.
but we are out of time. I really appreciate both of you being with us. Director of Shafakna Institute for Middle Eastern Studies, Catherine Shakna, out of London, political commentator and Middle East expert, Jihad Morakate, out of Beirut. And as always, viewers, we appreciate you being with us. Make sure you join us same time, same place tomorrow. I'm Marcia Hashemi signing out for myself and all the crew right here in Tehran. See you next time.